Menstruation, also known as a period and many other colloquial terms, is the regular discharge of blood and mucosal tissue from the inner lining of the uterus through the vagina. The menstrual cycle is characterized by the rise and fall of hormones. Menstruation is triggered by falling progesterone levels and is a sign that pregnancy has not occurred. The first period, a point in time known as menarche, usually begins between the ages
and I have
of
long
12
ebony
and
black
15.
hair. That's how I got my name, with purple streaks and red tips that reach my mid-back, and icy blue eyes like limpid tears, and a lot of people tell me I look like Amy Lee.
If you don't know who she is, get the hell out of here.
I'm not related to Gerard Way, but I wish I was because he's a major fucking hottie. I'm a vampire, but my teeth are straight and white. I have pale white skin. I'm also a witch, and I go to a magic school called Hogwarts in England, where I'm in the 7th year. I'm 17. I'm a goth, in case you couldn't tell, and I wear mostly black. I love Hot Topic, and I buy all of my clothes from there. For example, today I was wearing a black corset with matching lace around it and a black leather miniskirt, pink fishnets, and black combat boots. I was wearing black lipstick, white foundation, black eyeliner, and red eyeshadow. I was walking outside Hogwarts. It was snowing and raining, so there was no sun, which I was happy about. A lot of preps stared at me. I put up my middle finger at them.
Okay, cool. So now that we've skirt off the riffraff, let's talk about Turning Red. Hello everyone, I'm Fiona Apollo and I do art commentary. Turning Red is one of the latest animated films to come from Pixar's repertoire, and it has made quite the impression, from people really liking it to people having some pretty polarizing takes on everything from its art style to its messages. I have been anticipating this film coming out for a while, less because it's a highly anticipated Pixar film and more because red pandas are just my favourite animal, but there really wasn't much talk about it until the release date that I can recall. But surely enough, it finally arrived, on Disney Plus only. Which I don't have. I was kind of surprised that this one didn't get a theatrical release. Encanto did, so what's the big deal? Disney cites lingering concerns about the pandemic as well as delayed box office recovery as the reason, but do we believe them? I don't know. I find it hard to believe anything the rat says these days, but that's none of my business, so what can you do? Well, we can talk about it. Today, I'm going to discuss the plot, the perceived messages of the film, the overall reception, and maybe a tiny bit of headcanoning, who knows. So strap in, and if you can't handle discussions around things like periods and hormones, then how did you make it through that intro? Alrighty, let's get into it. Firstly, let's go over the plot. Timestamps are in the description if you would like to skip. The story follows Mei Lin Lee, aka Mei, a 13-year-old Chinese-Canadian girl who is an overachiever in the hopes of receiving her overprotective mother Ming's approval. Even though she is studious and hardworking, she's still a 13-year-old who is starting to become more interested in things like crushes and is developing more varied relationships with people outside of her immediate family, such as with her friends Miriam, Priya, and Abby. The girls are also obsessed with the boy band Four Town and are desperate to attend a concert happening in Toronto. After being embarrassed by her mother mistaking her having a crush and drawing some less than upstanding drawings of a boy working at the local convenience store as something more sinister, Mei finds the next day that she has transformed into a giant red panda. Ming explains that this is a residual power from when the female family members had to defend themselves during times of war and conflict back in China, but has now become kind of a nuisance in modern-day North America. This power can be sealed away, but only during a blood moon using a special ritual which is a month away. So within that time, Mei has to learn to keep the panda under control as any strong emotions allow it to be released. She learns that her friends are the key to helping her keep it under wraps, and after finding out that some people in Mei's school find the panda really adorable, because it is. How can someone not love red pandas? The four of them devise a plan to use the panda's cute factor to raise money for the tickets they need to go see Four Town. To get the last amount of money that they need, Mei agrees to be the panda at her bully Tyler's birthday party, but it's here that they discover that the concert and Mei's ritual will take place on the same night, and this puts her in a frenzy. Ming catches them in the act after Mei snuck out to attend the party and blames Mei's friends for their influence. On the night of the ritual, Mei finds herself unable to break away from the panda and chooses to keep it, running away from her family to the concert and damaging her mother's panda seal in the process. As she arrives and is finally with her friends and Four Town are within her reach, Ming arrives as a kaiju-sized panda and destroys the concert. Mei finally lets everything out about how she feels and the two duke it out, but Mei manages to knock Ming unconscious, so Mei's grandmother and aunties break their own seals to help Mei to complete the ritual to return Ming and themselves to normal. Mei chooses to keep her panda once more and the family's bond is strengthened. Ming trusts Mei more to make her own decisions, and Mei is able to keep her panda in check by embracing embracing it rather than keeping it wholly locked away. So my personal takeaway for the film is that it is very long overdue to have this kind of specific film made with young girls at the centre of it. We've had a few in the past, but girls coming of age films from when I was that age at least have always been in the realm of things like Wild Child, for example, this kind of weird over-glamorization of things like materialism and romance and things that feel very distinctly Hollywood and decidedly not rooted in reality. The kids in these films never felt like kids, they were just adult Hollywood actors pretending to be teenagers. The thing about children in media is that a lot of the time they feel a bit too out of their age range, to the point where they don't particularly feel like they represent what they're supposed to be representing, and it's kind of disorienting sometimes. And this can work both ways. You can have some kids acting too young and others behaving way too old. The worst offender by far for me in recent years is Ezran from The Dragon Prince. He just really does not behave like a 10-year-old in my mind. These girls, while still obviously having some fantastical aspects, behave the way 13-year-olds actually would. And it's really nice to see. I'm also really happy about this new trend of films striking a balance between acknowledging that family members can be in the wrong and should be accountable for that, while still being seen as regular people who are also deserving of empathy as they are equally just trying their best to do what they think is right. Very often in coming-of-age films, the parents are treated like an obstacle that have to be neutralized and not really as characters in their own right. And that's why, personally, Ming is my favorite character in the film. I thought that Ming in particular was a very well done character, and she was both fun and terrifying to watch on screen, because some of the scenes in this film really do feel like they were lifted out of your childhood fears. That Daisy Mart scene in particular is probably going to give me secondhand embarrassment for years to come. Overbearing parents is a bit of a tricky topic, because in a lot of media they tend to be vilified more than humanized, and I think that's why so many parents, and also children who are not watched like a hawk when growing up, are having an issue with getting this film initially. Because when you think you're doing the right thing, I believe that people do tend to develop this kind of tunnel vision, and any deviation from those ideals that you have assigned yourself can come across as an assault on your moral standing. In that same vein, when people don't grow up with overprotective parents, it shows. It really shows, I'm sorry. We can spot you from a mile away. Expanding on that protective aspect, I also felt that there was a very obvious dynamic of Ming and Miriam being two sides of the same coin when it comes to Mei and her sense of self. If you look at both Ming and Miriam closely, they share a lot of similarities. They are both close with Mei and are very motherly towards her, Ming of course being her actual mother and Miriam being the designated mum friend. They are very forthright in what they believe, they feel very strongly about wanting Mei to become the best version of herself, even though the perception of what that could be is widely different, and they even share the same signature colour. And I think it's interesting that they used green specifically. Green, after all, is the colour of envy. There were multiple instances in this film where Ming openly expresses her dislike for Miriam, and mentions at one point that she thinks Miriam holds Mei back while simultaneously trying to insert herself into her daughter's after-school meetup. And I believe this illustrates how Ming is potentially jealous of Mei and Miriam's relationship, mirroring that of her own with her daughter, which probably feels like it's slipping away ever so slightly. This is a common thing that happens with mothers and daughters who get along as their children grow up, and it's a part of the film that I appreciated because it shows us in a specific way Ming is trying to break her own generational cycle. Because of Ming's own panda, she and her own mother are not very close, and it starts to really show that Ming just doesn't want that kind of rift to happen between herself and Mei. Therefore, the film's ultimate message for me was the act of growing up and navigating the different changes in one's close relationships and coming to terms with the fact that things are never fated to stay the same forever, and we have to change and adapt accordingly while still finding a way to maintain a sense of balance through it all. So, because I know that this is something a lot of people want to hear me talk about, let's discuss the implied gay representation in the film. I don't know how people are going to feel about this section, but given everything happening with Disney and Pixar lately in relation to Disney being outed for being a supporter of the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, coupled with the open letter from Pixar employees regarding any gay rep being straight up shaved out of their projects by Disney executives, and the subsequent walkout that Disney animation employees took part in as opposition to the aforementioned bill, I think it's only fair that we look at this because, man, compared to other films, you can really see the residue of what Pixar were going to attempt to do with a few of these characters. So let's take a look. We'll start with the most obvious one, Priya. Priya is one of Mei's three main friends who is very, very easygoing and has a thing for vampires and is implied to be the most alternative of the group. Priya can be seen vogue dancing with a goth girl at Tyler's party, and her friends proceeded to wink and nudge at each other while it was happening. It might be a tiny thing, but in terms of what precious little gay rep we have in animated movies, it felt pretty significant. And this felt reinforced by the use of voguing, because voguing is a type of dance style developed by the queer black community specifically. On that topic of representation, I know we said this section is for gay rep, but I do feel that this is important to mention as well. There was some conversation when the trailer first dropped about the lack of black characters specifically present in the film, and the ones that did appear did not seem the most positively representative in terms of facial expressions and things like that. It's also speculated that Tyler, May's bully, is also Blasian, so black and Asian, but that was just something I saw floating around and I can't fully confirm it. But having the bully character be the main source of black rep is obviously not the best move if it is the case, even if his character does move away from that by the end. I don't want to comment too much on that aspect because I don't think it's my place to, but it is something worth noting when watching the film that the lack of rep for black people is a valid criticism. Some people mentioned that they would have liked to see all 4 girls be POC, and I personally would have been cool with that, but I can also understand from a marketing standpoint why they didn't do that, regardless of whether I and other people agree with it or not. But one thing that I also want people to recognise when looking at all of the background characters in this film is that this story has more cameos of Asians specifically from different backgrounds than any other film that we have seen in recent times, with one of the only exceptions being Home. Remember that film? The one where Sheldon Cooper and Rihanna went on an alien road trip? If you look at these 2 films, you will see a very heartwarming amount of characters, not just from East Asia, like May and Abby, who are Chinese and Korean respectively, but ones from South Asia and even the Middle East. And this is seen through multiple articles of headwear like turbans and hijabs, and it's just really nice to see. I think this is also probably to do with geography as well, since it looks like May's family shrine resides in Toronto's Chinatown. But yeah, looping back around to gay rep, I think Pixar's attempt at having Priya's bisexuality go under the radar was by having her be a closeted goth girl instead, which honestly is a pretty smart tactic. Alternative and edgy styles have historically been tied to being more open to the idea of a broader scope of gender and sexuality. If you look at alternative music and style icons like Freddie Mercury, David Bowie, Iggy Pop, and Gerard Way, being more free with your sense of identity coupled with the added bonus of sticking it to the man has always been something that brought a sense of security, as well as the first instances of community to many closeted queer kids. And I should know, I was a goth in school. And when you look at both Priya's design and the girl she dances with, that's when it starts to come together. I don't think she engages with gothic interests purely because she has a crush on a girl, but these design elements tend to be a lot more deliberate than you were first led to think. Moving on to the next character, I want to specifically talk about Tyler. Tyler started the film as kind of a bully, but then starts to become less inclined to that towards the second half, and is even welcomed to the group when they catch him also attending the Four Town concert with a ton of merch. Now, there are a few things I want to look at with Tyler. The first very obvious thing being that he loves Four Town just as much as the girls, which in itself is not an indicator of queerness because guess what? People can still be interested in non-traditional things while still being comfortable in their identity. But some people did interpret this as him having a crush on one of the members, Aaron Zed. This is also reinforced with his affiliation with basketball, considering this is a hallmark of Aaron Zed's personality trait, as well as his placement as the sporty one in the band. Another thing that caught my interest is that he wears earrings. Now, that's probably a bit presumptuous sounding, and I can imagine that there is possibly a cultural significance that I may be missing, but the film we are talking about here does take place in 2002. And obviously, I have no idea what the social climate was like in Canada back then, but I can't imagine it was vastly different to other English-speaking countries of the time, in that it just wasn't the most welcoming in the world to teenage boys having any deviation to traditional masculinity, cultural or otherwise. At first, before I rewatched the film, I thought he only had one ear pierced, which is why I clocked this, because anyone who's been in high school has probably heard that age-old debate going around about which ear is the gay ear when it comes to piercings. But as it turns out, he does have 2, so it really can't be said if this was something they were hinting at. It's also worth noting that he essentially becomes a part of the main friend group after the concert, and historically it's been pretty common for gay boys specifically to latch on to girl friendships, who generally tend to be more accepting of them. This obviously isn't always the case, but it is a thing that happens. And following that, the final character I want to mention in this section is Miriam, or rather, Miriam was more of the catalyst for this little discussion that I want to have. So it came out a short while ago that there was a casting call last year from Pixar for a character called Jessie who is supposedly going to be a trans girl, and a lot of people suspected that this may have been Miriam before the character was revised. I cannot verify the legitimacy of this, and it doesn't look to me that this was in any way intended for Miriam. Animated films of Pixar's caliber take several years to complete from start to finish, and putting out a casting call from last year makes the idea that this was for Miriam a little bit unbelievable. But the sheer fact that so many people suspected it was her made me want to discuss it. Trans representation is a bit of a tricky thing for a wide variety of reasons. The most obvious ones in recent time being that there is a growing transphobic rhetoric that is becoming dangerously commonplace, and it's something that we should be vigilant about pushing back against. And the other is that the trans identity is one that requires very careful consideration, because depending on how you look at it, it can become a bit of a double-edged sword, and there is a lot of potential for it to go badly wrong and cause more harm than good. If Miriam/Jesse was intended to be a trans boy, this would make sense given their chosen aesthetic, but could also veer into being a bit of a stereotype. And in the opposite direction, if they were to be a trans girl, the act of having her wear more masculine clothing compared to the other girls can have the effect of reinforcing that stereotype of trans women still only being viewed as men. We also again have the implication that comes with this film being set in 2002, a time when both rates of homophobia and transphobia were a lot higher than they are now. To put it shortly, I'm quite glad that they didn't go through with this idea if it was on the table, not because it wouldn't have been amazing to see a trans character in Turning Red, but because I think it would have invited a lot of backlash, and I think there are better ways to incorporate trans representation into the narrative. When looking into the audience reception of this film, I noticed something a little bit disheartening. Something that really surprised me with the initial release was how massively so many people missed a lot of the points with it, the most egregious of which being a handful of YouTube reviewers, and I just want to address it to illustrate my own thoughts on what is being said. I'm not trying to call anyone out, but I also don't think a minuscule bit of roasting would hurt anyone. So the way that some reviewers have gone about their criticisms really just kind of threw me, because a lot of them echoed the exact same sentiments of not being able to relate to it enough to find it interesting. And I don't think that a lot of it comes from them not trying to appreciate the film for what it is, but I find it very coincidental that a lot of the most prominent reviewers who are swaying people's opinions on this film have been dudes. Now, hear me out. Plenty of guys have really liked it and sung its praises, but there are just certain things in the way that people speak about something that clue you in as to the reason why they are speaking about it in a particular way to begin with, if you know what you're looking for. And the worst thing is that a lot of it isn't even on purpose, it's more of a subconscious thing. A lot of people have unconscious biases that just don't register to them, and it's important to recognise that aspect when someone brings it up with you. I can imagine that there are going to be things that I have missed or misinterpreted or misspoke on that people are going to pick up on in this review. Everyone has biases, it happens. This film, like many have said, is created by and for a specific group, but framing this point in a decidedly negative light ignores the fact that most of the films in existence do this as well, and I think probably why so many people had a hard time initially relating to May specifically is unfortunately because of a kind of minority effect. So what I mean by that is we are so used to seeing films with a particular type of protagonist, it's commonplace to subconsciously tune that aspect out pretty much automatically, because we're so used to doing it at this point. But when we have a protagonist who is not considered the default, and that can be anything from being a woman, being POC, being disabled, gay, whatever, I think people are a lot more hesitant to fully immerse themselves because they become more aware that this character is different from them for a variety of reasons. And it's been reinforced a lot more in modern times to be hyper-aware of minorities in fiction in terms of how they are both depicted and perceived. And as a result, every so often when a theme pops up in a film reinforcing that statement, instead of finding ways to either understand or relate to where they're coming from, the audience will instead just deny that it adds any value to the film whatsoever. Unless, of course, it's done in a pre-established way that they are used to. And that aspect, paired with the fact that groups who are not minorities tend to cry the loudest when they don't like something, makes it very difficult for films like this to be appreciated on a wider scale. A big thing I saw someone home in on is that Ming was supposedly out of touch with reality for being extremely overbearing, which is probably one of the biggest offending points for me, so I'm going to use this as an indicator that these guys have probably never had to deal with overprotective parents, and if they did, they never experienced the full extent of it. Now, I'm obviously not Asian, so I can't comment on that specific aspect, even though I am aware that it probably adds another layer onto things, but what I can comment on is the way that Ming acts in relation to managing the panda itself, and this is going to sound super weird, but being very cagey about allowing Mei to do anything with the panda in tow was low-key one of the most relatable parts of the film for me. I have a brother with special needs, so as a result, my parents, especially my dad who also has a smidge of anxiety, were very overbearing and protective when we were children. One of the panda's many interpretations is the feeling of control or responsibility, which I think is why all of the Lee family members are so desperate to keep it in, because they want to maintain that sense of control and the safety and reassurance that comes with it, whereas Mei is the one breaking the cycle and is instead learning to be more adaptable. There are a million different ways that media can be interpreted, interpreted, and it's completely fine if you can't find a way that applies to you. But personally, I think a lot of the way some reviewers are interpreting the film's themes is to do with the fact that they are simply people with singular worldviews, and this is neither good nor bad, but it does tend to paint a picture for others who might otherwise enjoy the film but are swayed by the opinions of specific people. Long story short, every person on Earth has a unique mind and a different combination of personal experiences, and what may seem irrelevant to you could actually be a major thing for someone else. Always do your own research and always get a second opinion. And also, if a film is targeted towards a specific demographic, seek that demographic out just to see what they think of it. With that in mind, I would recommend Frederick Chen's review of this film. It's very good. Moving on, one of the other things that people have been saying against this film is that it's inappropriate for children. So let's go into some of the things I've seen people mention. Strong language. May says crap 3 times in the movie, and Ming mentions drug use twice. Okay, yeah, I guess I can see where people are coming from with this, but then at the same time, crap is one of the most inoffensive curse words. And do you want to know what other kids' film from the 2000s uses that word, which is now a cult classic?
You wanna hold her? Yes. Please? Yes. Then you got to try a little tenderness. The chicks love that romantic crap.
I really don't think a 13-year-old using one of the lightest curse words in existence is something we should be especially worried about. If you heard some of the shit that 13-year-olds in British schools come out with, you would have a permanent psychic debuff applied to you for the next 10 years. And also, the argument against the word drug falls apart when you apply it to its affiliation to medicine. That's basically what it means. I think it's safe to say we can put the criticism of language to rest. But the real criticism of this film is when we get into the implications of puberty, and this is where I will clarify my stance on the final biggest criticism I have seen going around, what exactly the panda represents. So many people have presumed that the panda was meant to symbolise womanhood, aka becoming a woman and getting a period or whatever, and that can definitely be one of its themes. I can see where that comes from, especially with the bathroom scene. And because of that association with womanhood, it was inevitable that some kind of talk about periods would occur. What surprised me though was just how blatant they were with it in the film, and by blatant, they attempted an awkward mother-daughter chat that utilised a lot of metaphors, and the word pad was mentioned. When you look at that and compare it to the amount of outrage it sparked, I don't know about anyone else, but to me it felt kind of disproportionate. I've noticed that a good few people who seem to have an issue with this part of the film fall into a couple of specific categories. The first is boys who feel like they shouldn't have to be made aware of these things, which, no, I think you should, because being grossed out by an unopened tampon isn't cute or funny anymore, it's actually really annoying. And the second is parents who, for whatever reason, are angry that the film does this. Either because they don't like that a piece of media beat them to it, or they were never planning on explaining it to their children in the first place and are just using it as a scapegoat to cry about how inappropriate this kind of talk is. Periods are not inappropriate. Half the population has them, and this film is a massive aid to parents as well as kids because it offers a more relaxed and age-appropriate way to open up a conversation about it. Getting your first period with no prior warning can be a traumatic experience. Some girls go as far as to think they're dying, and a film like this could be so helpful with easing their minds, and people are angry about that? If you aren't mature enough to have these kinds of conversations with your children, then I have the perfect solution for you. Don't have any. A lack of education hurts everyone, not just the one targeted group, because a lot of these topics are an eventuality, and it really stunts your ability to empathize and navigate topics that are unfamiliar to you in a compassionate and balanced way if you just straight up reject them. There are many different things that the panda can be attributed to, but what I personally interpreted the panda to be is the physical embodiment of freedom. Freedom from oppression, freedom from generational cycles, expectations, freedom from bottling everything in until it just explodes, freedom of expression, freedom from other people's opinions, freedom from needing someone else to protect you or be the breadwinner, just freedom. All of these things that many people, but more often girls, have to grin and bear and learn to live with either having or not having, which many will use as an indicator of what most accurately describes the idealized version of womanhood. Ugh, that was a mouthful. So let's wrap this up, shall we? So overall, I really enjoyed this film, and it was very clear that this was intended as a personal passion piece, and contrary to the belief of some, I don't think that's a bad thing at all, and if anything, we should have more stories like that. It's been revealed that according to the Nielsen chart, which is a ranking website for streaming services, Turning Red scored 1.7 billion minutes of viewing in only 3 days, giving it one of the best streaming debuts for a film on this chart. Just think of how much higher the viewership could have been if the film had been released in theaters. It's insane. This film has the potential for many more stories featuring girls' experiences and perspectives to become hits with mainstream audiences, and I'm excited to see what comes after it. But for now, I think I'm done. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe. What did you interpret from this film? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to see what some of you think of all this. Stay safe, everyone. Bye!